Is it possible to experience reality in its purest form without thought contaminating it? This question opens the door to a deep reflection on the nature of thought and experience, an invitation to question what we call being and perceiving in a world that relentlessly moves faster than we can comprehend. To speak of thoughtlessness is to enter a paradoxical realm, where the absence of reflection becomes the highest manifestation of thought. We are presented with the image of a being who, devoid of the hesitant inner voice, moves without hesitation, regret, or delay. In this sense, the thinker who has chosen to transcend the mental whirlwind resembles a zombie. Both figures act without stopping, without the interference of an internal monologue. However, in one of them, there is a trace of having surpassed language and logic, while in the other, thought never even sprouted. How, then, can the absence of thought become a manifestation of full existence, or at least a state that distinguishes the ordinary from the extraordinary? Human beings, immersed in the relentless tide of time, face the paradox of living in perpetual delay. Every time we grasp a thought, reality has already moved forward. The instant a thought forms, it has already vanished into the fleeting present. The flow of experience escapes us like a rushing river, and in trying to narrate what we have lived, we become commentators of a game unfolding too fast to be understood in real time. Even before words can be articulated, the mental process has already shaped the idea, and before that idea takes form, something even deeper has preceded it. Thus, thought does not appear as the origin but as a mere intermediary, a shadow chasing an unattainable reality. Thought behaves like a domino piece that, instead of starting the game, acts as a link trying to mask its own origin. If cognition always moves with delay, chasing a present that has already passed, where then is the epicenter of what we call now? Experience blurs between memory and interpretation, revealing that the moment we recognize something is no longer the moment we lived it but the instant when the experience has already transformed into memory. This separation, so subtle yet so profound, unveils a gap that stretches between what is and what we can comprehend. In this sense, life becomes a choreography where our thoughts glide across a stage of lost immediacy. Every word, every concept, is built upon raw experience, before being processed, before being framed within the structure of language. The process of naming, defining, and excluding is intrinsic to cognitive activity. By naming what we feel, we fragment the totality of experience into isolated pieces, into concepts that can never fully encompass the whole of what has been lived. Immediacy is lost within structure, and in this act of division, we renounce the intact essence of reality. Amidst this dance, the paradox of consciousness emerges, an existence marked by constant retrospection. We never encounter reality in its purest form. It always arrives with an echo, a delayed reflection that distorts the lived moment. The person who reflects steps away from action, becoming merely an observer, a witness to their own existence. That self that acts dissolves into the self that contemplates, and in this process, immediacy becomes a mirage. No matter how immediate an action seems, it is already impregnated with the shadow of thought, of interpretation, and the inevitability of time. Language, in its inherent clumsiness, is yet another actor in this drama. Words, in their attempt to translate the ineffable, become imperfect versions of a reality that eludes all capture. The moment a thought is articulated, it is inevitably distanced from its original essence, transformed by the filter of culture, context, and an imperfect medium that always leaves behind a residue. Every fragment of an idea, every attempt to represent the totality of experience, is marked by the insufficiency of language to capture the vastness of what is lived. Thus, we are shown a distance that is not merely temporal but ontological. The essence of each thought becomes fragmented when we try to express it in terms that, no matter how precise, can never fully encompass the totality of being. The gap between being and expression becomes an inescapable phenomenon, an inherent condition of consciousness. The attempt to deny thought ironically falls back into the act of thinking itself, for the very tool that separates us from direct experience is also what defines us. Thus, in every negation, in every attempt to silence the internal monologue, the impossibility of escaping the incessant cycle of cognition becomes evident. Consciousness, in its quest to grasp the ineffable, finds itself trapped in a cycle of self-reference, like a serpent biting its own tail, locked in an endless dance of reflection and evasion. This vicious cycle of thought and observation leads us to an existential dilemma. Is it even possible to do away with thought without losing the very essence of who we are? We are confronted with the image of the meditative mind, those fleeting moments when thought seems to dissolve, and yet, a residual awareness emerges, manifesting as a meta-thought, a persistent shadow that prevents the complete liberation from mental activity. The paradox becomes most evident in the experience of inner silence, a state longed for by many but only attainable in a limited way. The more we strive to silence the mind, the louder the inner voice seems to echo, as if consciousness refuses to be forcibly extinguished. Every attempt to reach absolute silence is frustrated by the inevitable return of thought, which acts as a gravitational pull from which there is no escape. The struggle to rid oneself of thought becomes a futile pursuit, an endless journey where every step toward supposed thoughtlessness is undermined by the very nature of the mind. It is like trying to grasp smoke with one's hands or chasing a horizon that recedes with every step forward. The thoughtless one, the person who attempts to exist without the mediation of thought, ultimately faces the contradiction of being, in essence, a product of thought itself. And yet, within this apparent impossibility lies an enigmatic beauty. The renunciation of the need for absolute truth, the acceptance that knowledge is always partial and fragmented, becomes a liberation that transcends the constant search for answers. The thinker who chooses to live without the burden of reflection frees themselves from the constraints imposed by language and logic, embracing a form of existence that is, in itself, an act of faith in the unknowable. This surrender does not mean the disappearance of thought but rather the integration of thoughtlessness as an essential part of being, a precarious but profoundly human balance. In this context, freedom is not defined as the ability to reach an ideal state of non-thought, but rather as the absence of the need for predetermined destinations, as the renunciation of the obsession with achieving an ideal of enlightenment that, in the end, reveals itself as yet another form of limitation. Living without the pretense of mastering the totality of experience, without trying to encapsulate in words what is vast and ungraspable, becomes an act of true liberation. In this sense, the path of the thoughtless is not an escape but a radical acceptance of the imperfection and incompleteness inherent to the human condition. The journey toward thoughtlessness is, therefore, a path full of nuances and contradictions. It is a voyage in which every attempt to escape thought is inevitably swept up in the whirlwind of consciousness, where every action, every emotion, is stamped with the inescapable mark of interpretation. Experience transforms into a hall of mirrors, where the original image of reality shatters into multiple reflections, none of which can fully capture the entirety of being. In this labyrinth, the only constant is the unavoidable presence of thought, which, despite its delays and fragmentation, never ceases to accompany us. The dilemma intensifies when we delve into the search for freedom. The very concept of freedom appears as a cage, a structure that traps us in an endless cycle of aspirations and disappointments. The notion of seeking truth becomes counterproductive, for in the attempt to find a definitive answer, we drift further from the essence of being. Every theory, every system of thought, reveals itself as an attempt to conceal the unfathomable complexity of existence behind formulas and structures, distracting us from what truly matters, the direct experience of reality. The paradox grows even more intricate when we consider the role of intuition and preverbal cognition. Before ideas crystallize into words, there exists a primordial state in which experience is pure, untouched, and free from the interference of language. This realm of non-thought is, for some, the very essence of intuition, that ineffable spark that precedes the formulation of thought. However, in attempting to capture this essence, the process of conceptualization introduces a barrier that prevents full access to the original experience. Thus, intuition becomes a half-built bridge between what we are and what we can come to understand. Reflecting on this gap leads us to question the nature of existence itself. What are we if not a convergence of fleeting moments, memories, and interpretations that unfold ceaselessly. The answer seems to lie in the acceptance of thoughtlessness as a way of being, a stance that embraces uncertainty and imperfection without fearing the loss of life's essence. To live without the pretense of knowing everything, without the urge to encapsulate the vastness of experience in precise terms, becomes an act of rebellion against the tyranny of excessive thought. Along this path, we glimpse the image of a being who, by renouncing the obsession with mental control, immerses themselves in the ceaseless flow of life. Each moment becomes an ephemeral gift, an invitation to experience the unknown without the chains of interpretation. Liberation does not mean silencing the mind, but rather learning to coexist with it, accepting that thought is an inevitable companion, but not necessarily a master. True freedom lies in the ability to let go, to allow life to unfold in its most authentic form without the constant mediation of reasoning. The experience of this freedom, though paradoxical, holds the power to awaken profound emotions. By ceasing to resist the inertia of thought, a space opens where the sublime and the tragic coexist in perfect harmony. Existence transforms into a poetic act, where every breath, every glance, is a brushstroke on the canvas of life. Melancholy blends with euphoria, and in that whirlwind of emotions, we discover that what truly defines us is our ability to embrace uncertainty. The path toward this way of living, without the pretense of achieving cognitive perfection, is, ultimately, a journey toward authenticity. The pursuit of absolute truth dissolves in the acceptance that reality is a mosaic of fragments, each carrying a unique story while also being part of an unfathomable whole. Thoughtlessness then becomes the gateway to an existence where truth is not imposed but discovered in the spontaneous flow of each moment. Even amid the confusion and chaos inherent to life, there emerges the possibility of finding beauty in imperfection. Letting go of the need to master thought reveals itself as an act of humility, a sign that, in the end, what truly matters is the lived experience, not the perfection with which we attempt to describe it. In that acceptance lies the possibility of rediscovering the world with fresh eyes, free from the shackles of intellect and open to being surprised by the magic of the fleeting. The paradox of consciousness, with its endless dance of reflection and forgetting, becomes an invitation to live with intensity. It is not the absence of thought that sets us free, but the ability to recognize and accept its inescapable presence without falling into the trap of its excessive domination. In the precarious balance between acting and observing, between feeling and interpreting, lies the possibility of achieving a form of existence that, though riddled with contradictions, is profoundly authentic. The idea of living without the constant mediation of thought does not imply the annulment of the mind, but rather a conscious integration of its limitations and virtues. It is a return to the essential, to the direct experience of being, where each moment is valued for what it is, without the distortions of interpretation. It is a call to abandon the obsession with understanding everything and instead immerse ourselves in the richness of the present, with its light and shadows, without fearing the loss of connection to reality. This vision, as challenging as it is liberating, invites us to rethink our relationship with thought and reconsider the very meaning of existence. In a world seemingly governed by urgency and constant noise, finding peace in the acceptance of the uncontrollable becomes a revolutionary act. Authenticity manifests in the ability to let life unfold without the constraints imposed by an excessively analytical mind, in the certainty that, in the end, true wisdom lies in living with an open heart to the inexplicable. Reflecting on thoughtlessness and the nature of thinking confronts us with the paradox of being trapped in a perpetual cycle of interpretation while simultaneously being offered the possibility of freeing ourselves from that prison. It is not the elimination of thought that will grant us freedom, but the understanding of its role and the acceptance of its inevitable delays. Life, with all its contradictions, presents itself as a symphony in which each note, though imperfect, contributes to a unique and unrepeatable melody. By allowing ourselves to experience each moment without the interference of excessive analysis, we open the door to a way of being in which the sublime reveals itself in the ordinary, and where the beauty of uncertainty becomes the very essence of existence. The paradox of consciousness challenges us to find balance, to live with the certainty that, although thought always arrives late, the mere act of existing in the now is already an unparalleled manifestation of freedom. Thus, in the eternal dance between being and thinking, we discover that the most valuable lesson is learning to embrace the mystery of life, letting each experience unfold in its own unique and enchanting way.